Thanks for lightening it up,
Just saying.
Mayor Tate.
Just
Or
saying.
what's
I have been deputized.
deputized mayor,
Acting.
acting Mayor Tate.
Sitting. I have
Sitting
the
Mayor Tate.
microphone, therefore.
And the gavel, I hope. Oh, there it is. There's
Oh,
the
yes.
gavel.
Still here.
Don't forget to use that.
Thanks.
Are
So
we
at
done now?
4:42, I'm going to call to order our Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, September 26th at 4:30 p.m. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I can do the land acknowledgement again. Is it some new meeting? I like the land acknowledgement. So let's take a moment to acknowledge, always, the land on which we gather. It is the traditional territory of the Ktunaxa, the Syilx, and the Sinixt people, and is home to the many Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. We can have any late items. Seeing none, may I have the adoption of the agenda as written? Councillor Page, seconded by Councillor Logtenberg. All in favor, and that carries. Next, we'd like to adopt the minutes of previous meetings of Committee of the Whole.
Move.
Councillor Woodward, second by Councillor Page.
May I just
Are there any? Go ahead.
comments? I know it's just a capacity issue, but do we think we'll be able to have the minutes at the next meeting so we don't get it as a chunk?
Possibly. I can't make any promises. We are playing catch up from, as you can see, as you've
Yeah.
noticed from the past couple meetings, for a few meetings, probably since the spring, and that definitely was a staffing changeover.
Okay.
We're almost caught up. So it may not happen at the next meeting, but definitely at the next meeting.
Okay, great.
Okay?
That's good.
Thank you. Seeing no changes to the minutes. All those in favor of adopting the minutes from the previous meetings as written, and that carries. Item 6 on the agenda is our city manager's verbal report. Manager Cormack.
Sure. Well, like all of council, we were at UBCM all last week. I think I was in 26 meetings over that 5-day period, ranging, I think, the major topics, certainly housing, the vulnerable population, homelessness was a big topic there. And probably funding, certainly we're with the significant increase in costs over the last couple of years, certainly a number of our projects that we applied for grants for a couple of years ago are being really challenged to, try to make those work within those funding envelopes. So that, that was really kind of the work that all of us did, both getting prepared for these meetings and attending these meetings. I thought we had many productive meetings, and I think, the minister, whether it's staff or the ministers themselves, I think were, appreciative with the work that, this council's doing in community on all aspects of those. I did sit on a panel about decriminalization of the toxic drug supply. I thought that, there was the mayor of Victoria, mayor of Terrace, I believe.
CAO Smithers.
The mayor of Smithers, CAO from Campbell River. So I think Dr. Bonnie Henry, and the top ministry staff. I think there's a lot of work being happening there. I think what we heard from communities were just, there's such a resource shortage in our communities that it's a real, I think they know where they want to go, but I think the resources to, to make that happen in our communities aren't there yet. And we did have a meeting with ministry staff and the minister, and one of the things they're doing is actually trying to get a better handle on what the challenges in community and what the resources are now, and hopefully be able to attach not sure what the terminology they use, but a health plan with individuals struggling and making sure that they're not lost through the system and that those resources are there. They're hoping that will be done by spring. And so looking, I think that's something council's asked for is, what is the plan for our region and, how will that be rolled out in our region? And I think, getting this data of understanding the scope of what the services that are needed will go, at least will be a good base to try to understand what the resources that are needed. So I will leave it to the rest of council. I know all of you attended many meetings and many other sessions, and I think overall it was a really good conference.
Thanks very much. Was there any questions for our city manager? So we can move to council reports. Who would like to go first? Go ahead. Councillor Page.
Okay, I'm just gonna roll us back to long ago, last week. So since our last report, I just want to go through the committee work. At the Joint Resource Recovery, we approved the Memorandum of Understanding for Kootenay Boundary to come in and bring its organic waste to the facility. There's still negotiations to complete there for staff, but the board has finished the part about the MOU and what we are looking for. So they will be figuring out contamination rates, tipping fees, and how to handle all the logistics there. I attended the NADP Economic Development Partnership committee meeting, which also brought in a bunch of advisory because we had the update on the Greater Nelson Workforce Housing Study that is being conducted by Macola. Some recommendations will be coming forward to the regional district and the city of Nelson. Some clear pieces, and there'll be more updates at the housing committee tomorrow, but became pretty clear from the consultation that the direction being recommended is a corporation of some sort with some partnerships. That the barriers really identified are pre-development funds, and so figuring out how we as a region collaborate on producing those funds so we can get these projects to a place that they are ready to be developed further will help accelerate those investments from the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation and BC Housing. And so those are all the discussions and debates we'll be having at both our tables going forward, but just as a heads up that's coming. We received reports and our CEO Cormac was here for this meeting as well, so if there's any additionals he wants to add, just around the rural labor shortage. So there is definitely a disparity between employers that are having an okay time retaining their employees and ones that are not. And it's something that was highlighted out of that study coming out of Selkirk is that the cost of living in the area compared to the wages in the area is a struggle, and that the organizations that are investing in benefits and compensation for their employees and really focusing in on their workforces are able to retain their workers and build their workforces out, and the ones that are struggling because of cost limitations or other limitations to meet those demands that the workforce is experiencing are struggling to hold on to people, and that's spreading through our community. So that cost of living component is increasingly important as we craft policy. Moving on to the board work, I will leave the conversation about the West Kootenay Transit Committee to my colleague, Councillor Lautenberg, as the chair of that committee. We adopted a staff safety policy, which was about defining and formalizing staff policy when dealing with incidents of behavior that puts staff in unsafe harassment, bullying situations, and outlining essentially, so it's a super straightforward and clear policy, what the documentation requirements, what kind of activities, what remediations can be done when staff are put in those situations, and how the appeal process might work. This is our response to staff dealing with situations in facilities that escalate due to misunderstandings or miscommunications or any other values misalignment in terms of what the RDCK is capable of producing. But staff really felt that a policy needed to be put in place from the board. So that has been done. We've received the draft, I think, for all of us who are new to going through the strategic planning process. And I just wanted to highlight that we have now received our draft version of our strategic plan, which does kind of put into context how long the process can take from workshop to document to finalizing the document. The RDCK working session for the strategic plan was a little bit before ours, so we did get the draft version of the language. And one of the new areas that the board is hoping to support is around the regional growth approach and how we sub-regionally organize ourselves to be most effective and make the best use of taxpayer dollars. Other highlights, of course, that making a little bit of the rounds is we were asked by one of the directors to have a consideration of recording for and against for the votes. There have been a number of transparency and accessibility suggestions around the table with this current board, and so those have all been referred to a future meeting, which is probably going to require a revamp of the procedural bylaw, including should we or should we not record things and post those videos online, should we or should we not record every single vote, yay or nay. There was a couple conversations that have been had over the last few months on how we can be increasingly accessible and transparent and make those meetings most accessible to the most number of people. So we will do that as a whole to achieve those values. And then finally, we were at UBCM. If Sarah had wanted to throw up a little bit of a, yeah.
Cue the entertainment.
Big announcement coming, well, the conversation coming out of the Premier's office is consolidating many of the rural programming pieces. The Premier spoke to this about having a clearer rural lens on how they apply programming, much like you might have an Indigenous or a climate lens. You would also bring forward a rural lens to ensure that our unique situation out here is understood and resourced effectively when it comes to delivering programming. I'm just going to quickly speak to the AKBLG advocation. So we had a number of meetings about supporting recruitment efforts for communities when dealing with healthcare challenges. And some communities are doing a lot, and others are scraping for resources. And the ask was to find a more cohesive way of advocating out as communities to the rest of the country and out externally to bring people to BC to help solve those healthcare challenges. And so we'll be getting some additional information from the Ministry of Health that we will distribute out to the membership, and looking for more equity and cost recovery for emergency callouts. And then we just grabbed a few photos from UBCM. We have our friends out in trail at the conference showing things off. We have the Longstanding Service Award for Hans Cunningham after 37 years of service, and of course President Jen Ford's conversation. And then we were lucky to be around for the weekend, and it was car-free day on Denman, so me and Adam went to go check things out and enjoy. All of Denman closed down. Of course, Chris Johnson giving a great presentation on our wildfire community response. And one of the pieces, the final piece that IAKBLG had been advocating for was moving towards a more allocation-based funding model for emergency response. One of the announcements coming out of the province is that when it comes to wildfire protection, communities that are of, I think, category 2 or 3 risk factor have community wildfire protection plans will qualify for an allocation-based funding model this year, and Nelson is one of those communities that hits all those targets, and so we are seeing a movement in that direction. And other than that, that is my update. Questions?
Go ahead, Councillor Leuchtenberg.
Thanks for that, Councillor Page. That was really comprehensive. That was good. Just one question about the RDCKs and climate action engagement, and if you have an update on how that's going, because I know there were some challenges early on, and I think we've got a couple more to go. Certainly one, I think, more local on end of the month or something.
Yeah, there's a series of meetings. So we had kind of more discussion-based meetings earlier on in the summer in response, and now we're moving to more of an open house model. And it's just what the RDCK is really taking away from conversations coming to it about its climate implementation plan is that there's an opportunity here to engage people around the local government work around that planning. And I don't have the date. I think the next one in Nelson is more towards the middle/third part of October, not like in the near immediate, but
I think
yeah.
I have the list here.
Do you?
October 3rd in Caslow,
yeah,
October 4th in Castlegar,
yeah.
October 10th Nacusp, October 11th Robson, October 16th Tagum, October 17th North Shore.
Yeah.
It goes more.
Yeah. And so they've really taken an approach of, especially post-pandemic, of getting back out there in the community around this one, about taking these conversations nearby to people so it's convenient and easy for them to bring forward those conversations. And then using that to inform what the public would like us to be doing when it comes to environmental stewardship, because we all understand that we set policy. It has to be informed by the public. It has to be informed and enabling to the public to take those actions. And so the RDCK is diving quite deep into really engaging around this topic now that these issues have been raised. And that's on the whole, and I've said this around the table, but in public, I think it's really for the benefit of everybody. I think you're seeing a great opportunity for people to discover with a lot more depth and clarity and authenticity the work that's going on at the local government level through this topic, and we're able to have those conversations and in an increasingly respectful manner.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Councillor Page? Any other reports? Councillor Lochtenberg.
Thank you, Chair. So today we had our West Kootenay Transit Committee meeting, and I'll start by just doing a quick update from the rural strategy that the Premier presented on Friday. The three key components of the rural strategy was transportation, healthcare, and transportation to healthcare. And prior to the release of that plan, I had been, and I think many of us have had a briefing, conversations with our MLA about that strategy, and she's been a part of writing that strategy, chairing or co-chairing the Rural Caucus. And I'll just say that while the word transit didn't make in the rural strategy, it was emphasized. The MLA assured me that was an oversight on the drafter's part, that it was so taken for granted that when you say transportation, transit is central to that conversation, that to actually miss saying transit was not intentional and soon to be rectified through a series of engagements that the MLA intends to make, including hopefully an upcoming trip that you will all be invited to ride transit with us as we have a planned transit meeting on transit, as perhaps we head out to, say, Ainsworth, to show that transit can also get you to some really great amenities. It's not just about getting to work. And we'll have a chance to really talk about transit as we ride out to Ainsworth and back. So you're all invited, and I think it could be a real good opportunity to dig into the importance of transit in the rural context and what makes it unique. So that does lead to today's meeting. The transit system is still facing some challenges. We did hear, although it's definitely improving post-pandemic, ridership's not back to pre-pandemic levels, but it's getting there. One of the challenges I think that we've seen and came back up again today is a few routes, in particular the routes in Selmo. I can't remember if it's 70, is it 78?
72.
72, thank you. There's some staffing issues. So that led to, and that one in particular, getting staffing so NextGen has not fully staffed back up. They're missing one driver, and we are up to, I think it's a 94% or 92 to 94% completion rate. Ideally, you want to see that at 100%, because every one of those percentages that aren't means somebody's left on the side of the road. And Mayor Lockwood and Salmo did raise this as an issue, and as did Dr. Breen, who I will mention in a second, having exactly that experience. People getting out to Selmo and then not being able to get back because they missed a bus, and it's a pretty critical issue. We all agree. So Dr. Breen, Dr. Sarah Patricia Breen from Selkirk College presented to the committee about a study on rural transit, basically looking at, in particular, the Selmo context. And like I said, ironically, one of her grad students who was doing the study took transit to Selmo Fair to do interviews and got stuck because she couldn't get home because the bus didn't show up. So it was really poignant. And so she presented the preliminary findings of the study. And it was finding that while there had been a drop-off in ridership because of the pandemic, the desire for a transit was high. In fact, 90% of respondents, I think it was, said that they would consider taking transit and wanted to, many of whom had never taken transit before. So there did seem to be, her suggestion was that there did seem to be a strong desire for transit. So from that, however, we did agree that we really needed to get a letter out to Premier Eby and to Minister Fleming and Minister of State Dan Coulter about really emphasizing the priority of the transit in terms of the rural strategy, priority of transit in the rural strategy. So that will go out. Danica White, the government relations manager from BC Transit, will be presenting today. She did speak about some expansion issues, and I think we'll hear about that today. Tessa Stewart, who's also from BC Transit, was speaking about the U-Pass. Now that's something that will also be coming back to this table as to the RDC K Table 2 before it can go to Selkirk College. So we need to agree on whether or not a U-Pass, which is that student pass, is something we're willing to support, and how. And if so, then it can go to the student body at Selkirk College for them to now, obviously that's a conversation we'll have, so about if this is something we want to support, especially considering that 99 is that route between Nelson and it's largely used by Selkirk Colleges tends to be full. And so putting more riders onto that route is something we'll have to talk about. However, part of our top priorities that we'd like to invest in, 99 is certainly one of them. So it's 99, 98, and 10, which is the North Shore route. So that connection from, say, all the way from Caslow to Trail, our priorities, they tend to be, over subscribed. We did, again, heard from Trevor Stack at NextGen about the challenges that NextGen is having. And this led to our own Jody Cayley speaking about the core issue with transit as our operators are seeing it, which is recruiting drivers. This speaks to something that Councillor Page was talking about in terms of the labor shortage right now. This is critical. And it's not just NextGen, which there was some sense that maybe it's NextGen because they don't pay as well, whereas the city is facing the same challenges recruiting drivers. So what we proposed as a table is that, and we passed the letter endorsing it, and it's something I think that we should think about more strongly, is to apply for grants to ETSI-BC, which are closing soon, as in like next week or the week after, to develop a program to pay for driver training. That $3,000 of that it costs to get your license to then qualify. Right now, that's a big upfront cost that drivers have to pay before they even can effectively apply or consider applying. So it's something that we talked about. If we can get grant funding to support, that's something that ETSI said they're interested in supporting. we may be able to turn that around. However, that might be one of the barriers, but beyond that, housing is potentially the perennial barrier to recruiting drivers into the area. So I just want to share with this table, we need drivers. It's going to be critical if we want to expand the system. We're short drivers now and having a hard time recruiting them. So yeah, anything, we're focusing on this at the table, and I think Jody and will be coming forward to our staff to get that grant application written so that we can get some program put in place. The one success that we have seen has been a job fair, and so we may need to more proactively work potentially with KCDS to really develop a program for recruiting and funding even job training and for new drivers. And I think, again, we'll be hearing from Danica tonight, so I think that's it.
Just wondering if, also through the college that, they certainly have students that are, upgrading, doing skill development, and, they probably have no idea that this could be a decent paying career for them. And I think the biggest thing about housing is, making sure that we're tapping into our own local populations, and we aren't bringing people in from outside to put more pressure on housing, that we're upskilling people in our own communities to these are good paying jobs.
Mm-hmm. I just did on that two things I forgot. Funny anecdote, and then probably the most important piece. The funny anecdote was to underscore how difficult it is to get the drivers. Jody had put up a sign in front of Public Works saying, "We're looking for drivers." Well, the next day, SD8 put up a much bigger sign saying they're looking for drivers. So the competition between for drivers, and we have to figure this out. But yeah, ideally upskilling would be good. Interestingly, and this is why I have some hope on this, it did seem like this was an issue that caught everybody by surprise. They felt like, well, if we can just, offer more money, or if the city can do its thing, then we'll get the drivers. But no, I think we have to be more proactive. And we did identify that $3,000 to get to get the training you need is potentially a barrier for anybody who's thinking of stepping into this new career.
The college can get some of those grants.
I don't know. I was just trying to figure out where regionally do you get that training? Do you have to go to the Okanagan?
No,
I don't know.
No, there's trainings right here in Castor. Outfitters called, but no, there's training locally, and we have, it's the same company that does travel training for,
MTI?
Yeah. Same as, for truck drivers or whatever. And I know Jody has a relationship with that company, and make sure they're aware that this is an option for those that are getting trained on a commercial license. So.
Can I add a couple things? I think Councillor Lochtenberg hit all the key points from today. Just a couple things I was thinking of. One, with the difficulty in recruiting drivers, I think one of the issues too is that a lot of these positions are part-time. So, if we can kind of look at whether it's looking at our routing or how we can kind of change things a little bit to create more full-time positions might help. Also talking about the overcapacity on the 99 and things like that we're seeing on the 98. I know Trevor was talking about, that tends to happen in September, and then you kind of see a bit of a fall off in October as, some of those hybrid class structures, kids start to, maybe do a bit of online once you get into October, or, maybe aren't as diligent of going to classes in October and November as they are keen in September. But another interesting point was when that earlier bus arrives at Selkirk College, the doors of the college aren't open yet. So talking to them about, opening up maybe a little bit earlier so that those kids who show up on that bus can actually go inside and study or do something, get access to the building. So that's something they'll be looking to talk to Selkirk College about as well. Yeah, and also on the UPass piece, I think the approach, if I kind of understood correctly, was Tom Dool will kind of look at a bit of a business plan on how that'll look, how revenue sharing would look. Of course, I'll help him with that piece, but do all of that before we start talking to Selkirk College, but understanding what that would look, what kind of revenue is there, but then also, we'll have to look at what the demands are going to be on the system, and we need more drivers, we need more routes, more buses. How does BC Transit will help us kind of work that piece out, but understanding the full impact, because yes, there's a guaranteed revenue piece, but there'll be additional demand on service, so have to make sure that the math works on that. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. And I did forget one critical thing, and it was in the public meeting and did get some attention, was Anthony Mirando's presentation, again from BC Transit, on the contracting strategy for that's coming up. He did announce that, in fact, BC Transit had done or is in the process of doing a direct award for the West Kootenay system with the City of Nelson. So for the City of Nelson to take over these routes from Next Gen, everything from Nakusp all the way through. And in doing so, that direct award, as this table knows, is one in which it's really now a negotiation on between the city and BC Transit, and the other service areas are all up on BC Bid. So that means that everything is on the table, including the other routes in the system. Yep.
Any questions?
It's not in camera. No, it's very public, and we talked before about it. It's
Okay.
yeah,
Just checking.
yeah, it's all.
Councillor Payne.
I do ride the bus. I don't ride a lot of variety in the routes, but I've noticed a definite lack of, gender balance. Is that a question? And I know that in other careers where that happens, there's often incentives for training. Is that anything we could investigate? Or I know sometimes around the trades there's a lot of different things. It's obviously not, there just aren't bus drivers out there, I guess, or is that more of a time slot that works better for females to work for SD8 because of the timing, or I don't know, but it's just something I want to put on the table. Is there something we can do to attract more female or identifying as female bus drivers?
It's a great idea, and I think Sarah said that I think we have a job fair coming up, and I think HR will lead that, and so having some encouragement. One thing that Jody said, and I thought it was a really good point, that it's not just about recruiting anybody to be a driver. It's a special set of skills beyond just driving the bus. There's all sorts of you're essentially like the way he described it, having driven the bus for I think 3 years. He did say that you're a counselor sometimes. You're really engaged with your riders, especially on the same route day after day. And so I think that's exactly right. We should be looking to encourage more people to apply and think about this career as something more than just driving a bus down the road. There's a lot of, and Jody said it was incredibly satisfying job, and there's a lot to it beyond just driving the bus. And we should value, as a society, as a community, as a city, we should really lean into how much we value our bus drivers for doing more than just driving a bus.
For sure. If
Councillor
I
Payne.
could just add to that, I think sometimes it's also a mental health check. Many of those people, that may be their social interaction for the day, is their ride in or their ride out. And the bus drivers that I know are very open to having those conversations. How are you doing it? So I agree with you. It's more than just your ability to keep the bus on the road, stop at the right time and start at the right time. It's a full service opportunity, and I hope they feel valued. Do we have a special bus driver value day, or maybe I'll just do it next time I hop on. Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
Did you have anything further?
No, that's it.
Are there other reports? Oh, who did? Oh, that was a question. Sorry, I apologize. Council Page.
So I'm just going over the regional ground transport study coming out of the Economic Development Trust, which is, I think, where that funding from the province is coming forward to get clarity around what regionally we need to be approaching. And I'm wondering, when we're identifying these next set of asks, how we're prioritizing that in the context of this this report that came out at the end of August, which addresses both layered frameworks about inter-community travel, as well as local routes, as well as, and all the things you've mentioned already are pieces of some of that local connection. But there are other pieces here too that I would want to ensure we were aligning our approach and our ask to support what's going on there.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think with Sarah Breen, Dr. Sarah Breen on board, with Tom Duell, with the rest of our staff, and of course BC Transit, I think Councillor Page, you're absolutely right about aligning the asks that are complex when you start to lay them out with provincial strategy. And I think it does summarize up or package up nicely in the rural strategy that the province released. But the nuance, the depth, and the detail of what that means to create a strong inter-regional transportation network that really prioritizes equity, GHG reductions, and so on. Like, there's a lot of detail there that
Yeah, and they've gone into quite a bit of detail in terms of connecting communities and where priorities might lie and where funding opportunities are across the board.
yeah it's a great point. We should talk more about it, and maybe that's topic number one for our trip to Ainsworth on the bus.
Still, it feels like such a
Do we have a
huge task.
tentative date?
October 10th.
I think Mayor Morrison is online and has a question.
How did that do?
So vague.
No, I don't have a question. I just was going to give a report once everybody's
Oh, I
done
gotcha. Okay.
giving their reports. I'm looking forward to the October 10th bus ride to Ainsworth. I'm just putting it in my calendar as I sit here. And my apologies, I'm not going to come on camera because when I try to put on my camera, everybody and the sound disappears. So there's some technological glitch. So you get to see me as a square. But anyways,
Don't see you at
I
all.
just wanted to just say thank you to all of council for their participation last week at UBCM. And I'm sure that from that experience, we're going to have future discussions, and we'll see how what we did there ties into our strategic plan when we get to see it next month, as we continue to work on behalf of all the citizens of Nelson. And I just also want to say thank you very much to staff for the work that they did in advance to make sure that we had comprehensive packages when we went in to see the ministers. I did participate in 14 ministerial meetings, and all of you had 4 or 5 of those assigned as well to come and participate in. So once again, thank you to all of you, and thank you for really engaging. Everybody so far that I've talked to has had really good feedback and felt that it was a very productive UBCM this past week. So thank you for that.
Any questions for the mayor?
Actually, I was,
You can do your report
Well,
then. Councillor
I-
Woodward.
thank you. I want 2 things. I just wanted to say, echo what the mayor says in terms of how at UBCM I felt like staff was so prepared And when I was in those minister meetings, I felt like we were really locked in on what we wanted. It was very direct asks, which makes it easier for them to actually give us what we need. So I want to thank staff for generating all that excellent work. And then also really we got to go out and experience UBCM kind of as a whole. I have to say staff and the mayor were really doing these minister meetings almost the whole time. So thank you for allowing us to have that experience. I really felt like one of the things coming out of UBCM was the kind of uniformity of issues across the province. Obviously climate change and wildfire was way up there. The toxic drug crisis and housing and general affordability. I mean, these were all being experienced across BC and all communities. So there was kind of this sense of we're in this together because we have to solve some of these issues. But each area has its own unique challenges, and that's there's housing challenges here, but there's housing challenges in Kamloops and there's housing challenges in Vancouver, and they're very different. But it's all housing challenges. So I really felt a camaraderie amongst everyone there that we were trying to tackle these issues together. And the other piece I wanted to give a shout out to Bill's article, the street outreach team, Lynn, Jeremy, and Rael. I've worked with them through other employment positions, and they are, I consider them true heroes in our town. The work they do every day and have been doing for Jeremy and Rael for 8 years, and Lynn for 3, but then 5. She did 5 years in trail, and it's challenging work, and they're receiving 60 to 100 calls a day, and I really want to thank you for writing that, Bill. Super informative and really got their message out, and how critical they are to they're kind of that in between grouping between emergency services and street culture, and have done great work over all these years in our town. So I really want to thank that grouping and hope they can continue and get the funding they need. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have a
Councilor
report.
Payne. Good.
I believe it was right after the last meeting. I was at the ENCO meeting, the Nelson Committee on Homelessness, and I just want to mention that as we all see, the autumn is moving into our area. The trees are beautiful. The rain is here. The nights are a little cooler, as are the days. And that means that for those individuals who are unhoused, life becomes dramatically more difficult. So the regular ask of blankets, warm jackets, socks, boots is always there that you can drop off at the hub, or Stepping Stones, our homeless shelter. But a couple of things that they mentioned when I asked at the meeting that they don't always see were lip balms, which the exhibitors at the trade fair were very generous in giving to me when I mentioned that, and they had lip balms. I've got a good supply. Hand heaters, the little things that you put in your gloves. That's something that makes a difference in the level of comfort for both hands and feet when you live outside. And gloves was the other one. They said they get lots of socks donated, but they don't always get gloves. So I just wanted to put those few things out for anyone who is going through their winter clothes as they do their wardrobe changeover and find out they have maybe 1 or 5 too many toques and wondered what to do with them. They're welcome at the hub at all times. I did attend the John Valiant presentation at the Capitol, just I guess the Thursday night before we went. It was really interesting because he highlighted, other than his spectacular presentation, but he did highlight not only fire smarting, but a full 5-minute video with our own Fire Smart ambassador, Scott Jeffrey, maybe. And they showed the full video, and he just talked about how incredibly important that was to a packed audience. And I didn't realize until I went down to UBCM that not every community has taken advantage of, not only taken advantage, but just gone at it hard as we have here in Nelson. So deep thanks to whoever brought it to our city and the fire department and emergency management who keeps moving that forward. Even though it's raining, if you haven't fire smarted, you can still do it. It's never too late or too early to fire smart. The Housing Committee, of which I am the chair, is in its annual search for new members. We are looking for someone who has experience, among others, in the building, contracting, development area to replace a member who's moving out of the area. But everyone is welcome. The information is on our website if you look up Housing Committee, or you can please call or email me directly. I'd be happy to talk to you about it. And we're looking at novel, creative, let's make this happen in a way that maybe we haven't looked at before. So if you don't think you fit any of the categories on the list, call anyways. Because it's an area, as Councillor Woodward mentioned, that every community is experiencing this. So what we've done in the past hasn't necessarily been working, and if there's some creative solutions out there that anyone has, we need to start talking about those as well. My UBCM experience as a first-time attendee at UBCM was a lot of learning. It's a full-on 4.5 days of go, go, go. And I took advantage every time I possibly could, because the key thing for me at that conference was the relationships. I made sure to reach out and talk to different people from different cities and different areas, whether they were regional districts or staff or people from the resource sector or whatever, because it's those relationships. That's how we connect, that's how we learn, and that's how we move our community forward, and also share a lot of the amazing things that we're doing here that many communities can certainly take advantage of. So that was a big thing for me. I think relationships are how we move any big project forward. I also wanted to mention the street outreach, so thank you very much. It was a great article, and I'm hoping that Nelson Community Services will be at council for a workshop shortly. The one thing that I really wanted those guys to close with was that that's a program that is not sustainably funded. They can always use more money. So I know many social services operate in that way, but we know the incredible difference they make in the lives of people and the dozens of lives that they've saved by their very presence and relationships. So donations welcome at Nelson Community Services. I don't normally do an outreach like that, but since the newspaper article is there, I will talk to those guys and make sure they go for a strong close next time they get that opportunity. And I'll just end with one of my favorite things. The Accessibility Committee is also looking for members. It's incredibly important, again, to make sure that even if this doesn't sound like something you might have done before and you have a lot of hesitation or questions around it because of the whole concept of accessibility, just reach out, have a conversation. There are ways to make this happen in a way that can work for everybody. So please share your experience with us. It'll only make that committee stronger through a diverse participation. That's it for me.
Thank you. I think Mayor Morrison may have another comment or question.
Thank you so much. Just to follow up that both Jesse mentioned it and Councillor Woodward and then Councillor Payne just mentioned is that about street outreach and the fact that when we talk to all of the ministries and interrelated ministries, because it's not just mental health and it's not like mental health, the fact that we need to have this core funding for these social service agencies and I guess who was the other ministry we talked to? We talked to the Minister Farnworth's Ministry of Public Safety, the importance of street outreach to our community and their need for funding. So we delivered that message home hard to the ministers. We didn't just discuss it as a health issue or just mental health or just public safety. Like, it was there, and we interwove them all so that they could understand the sort of layers and depth and the importance of this team to Nelson. So that's, we're hopeful that perhaps some funding will come, or at least when they start talking about it, there'll be 3 or 4 ministries that said, oh, we heard from Nelson. And their ask was quite explicit as to what they were looking for. The other thing is, it's just a couple of things I forgot to mention, that at the end of this week, there is a survey out. The police, on Saturday, we started doing some preliminary work on a new strategic plan for the Nelson Police Department for the next 5 years. And we have a survey that's out until October the 1st, and really would encourage you to get online and fill out the survey. Please circulate it amongst your colleagues and cohorts. The more responses, as we all know, the better these things are in terms of proving themselves out. So that's very important. And the other thing is, in regards to policing, is it is unfortunate that the City of Nelson gets to select one member to sit on the police board. Now, they still have to get vetted by Victoria, so our pick isn't necessarily guaranteed to be on the police board, but we do have an ad out looking for people that might be interested in being on the police board. They do have to send us an application because, as council knows, we do a interview process of those that apply, and then select which name we would like to put forward to government. And that is also coming to a close. So please think amongst your friends and your peer groups and your associations, and maybe have a face-to-face talk with people that might be appropriate for the Nelson Police Board. So, and that is also closing very soon. So a few things to consider getting people engaged with for our community around policing. So thank you for that.
Questions or comments for the mayor? For my report, I also went to UBCM and can echo a lot of what the other folks said here. A couple things that happened recently that we didn't get to give shout outs to was the Kootenay Beer Festival, thanks to Nelson Kootenay Lake Tourism. It was 2 Saturdays ago. And then last Saturday, like 3 days ago, it was like a hat trick kind of a day, because there was the Harvest Market Fest on Baker Street, and then the Las Americas at the Capitol, and the opening game of the Leafs, although that was on the Friday. So just so many events that brings the community together. We're such a cool little town where you have like 500 or 600 or 700 people doing these different events, and really, really proud of our volunteers and how those things come together. And it showed when in the minister meetings, people always know us, know Nelson, not me. They know Nelson. They're like, oh, I've been there, I've seen this, and it's a great little town. So gratitude for always to our volunteers for keeping the city vibrant. If there are no further reports, and we don't have a workshop or educational session, I believe that I can request a motion for recess.
Temporary adjournment?
It says recess.
Recess.
Don't make up new words.
He's messing with it.
Councillor Lochtenberg, and a second, Councillor Woodward. All those in favor? That carries. We will re-adjourn at 7 o'clock with the Committee of the Whole.
Cool. Thank you. Meeting,
It's a traveling
motion.
meeting.
It's a workshop.
A workshop. It's to transit and why and the how and the.
So are we having
Yeah.
our own bus, or are we
Yeah.
traveling on a
dip and a meal
scheduled
and a-
bus?
Yep.
We're traveling on a scheduled
On a
bus.
scheduled bus. We're just riding the bus.
So then we have to get off and hang out for a while for the bus to get to Castle and come back?
Yes.
I'm
Exactly.
okay with that too.
So far, Brittany and I. And anybody else who wants to join us. I'm hoping all of you join us.
I am. I love the
Give it
I think
to
it'll
bus. That's
be-
a
I think it'll
beautiful
be fun.
ride.
It's a beautiful
3-minute
ride. It's
objective.
gonna be. We're
They
gonna.
said it's subjective.
It's gonna be all over
I read-
social media.
I read a
The
book
objective
from
is to
cover to
promote
cover
it
on
and
mountain
to-
bikes on Sunday. It was amazing. I never get to read like that anymore.
Yeah. That's the. You know,
Sign me up.
you need more stories like that. You need more stories like that. It's the best.
So it's 7 o'clock, and I will reconvene our Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, September 26th. Mayor Morrison has joined us remotely, and Councillor Pignaro is still away on his adventure in Ireland. So I have the pleasure. Okay, I have the pleasure of asking for a resolution to reconvene. Councillor Page, seconded by Councillor Lochtenberg. And all in favor, which carries. Thanks, everyone. At our Committee of the Whole meeting, we often have a cultural presentation, but tonight we do not. So I think that has been postponed to a later meeting. And so we will move to agenda item 11, which is the public participation component of the Committee of the Whole meeting. Public participation period is limited to 15 minutes in total. A speaker may only address council once for a maximum of 3 minutes, unless authorized otherwise by unanimous vote of council members present. Speakers must restrict their remarks to items that are listed on the meeting agenda. Speakers must not address council regarding a matter for which a public hearing must be held or has been held prior to council's consideration of the matter or adoption of the bylaw. Speakers must not address council regarding a permit for which public notice must be given or has been given prior to council's consideration of issuance of the permit. Speakers shall address all comments through the mayor or presiding member, which is me tonight. So if I look out among us, please let me know if you're hoping to participate in public participation. Wonderful. So when you come to the microphone, please give us your name and where you're from. You'll need to push the lock on the microphone, and I'll set the timer for 3 minutes once you're settled.
Okay. My name is Tamara Patricia Bala, and I've come here today to talk a little bit about spiritual violence. My background, I was a nurse, and I was in my last year of naturopathic medicine, about 6 months to finishing, when I was attacked. And through that, I had to learn a lot about this type of violence. And it affects every facet of our lives. Whether you're on the street or whether you're in the government, it actually affects us. Because of the type of violence this is, it's invisible, it's very difficult to handle, but we actually have a division in information between the spiritually violent population and the spiritually nonviolent population. And what that means is the spiritually nonviolent population are almost blocked from even trying to understand it, because the spiritually violent population don't actually want us to understand it. So I'm going to read a little poem to illustrate just a type of awareness that the spiritually violent population have, but don't wish to actually have us understand as a spiritually nonviolent population. So it's from the homeless book, right here. Okay, Cold, by Taylor Logstone. It's so cold outside. It's so cold outside. I cannot look you in your eyes. There is no demon in my stomach. There is no addiction in my blood. I am middle class. I am television sets and business suits. You threaten me, my self-image. You are a thorn in my world. I cannot look you in your eyes. There are a million questions I would like to ask, but I cannot ask them. I cannot look you in your eyes. Please, I have one favor to ask. Don't lay there in the Canadian cold streets. As I walk to the mall for a new suit and tie, there are a few things in this particular poem that indicate that he has a degree of awareness that the cause of a lot of our issues, whether you're homeless or even in the government, not making much sense like Trump, is that there's spiritual invasion within the mind. And what that means is that people are actually not necessarily capable of normal ADLs. Otherwise, they would normally be able to. Whether we're talking about the environment or homelessness, every aspect of our lives is affected because these people wish to take over the organism. So if you look at a seed, a spiritually violent person will take that seed and divide it up and actually invade the molecular structure. So they become, in our past we called a god, but they become the god of that seed because they took over the entire organism. Whether that's a human organism or a tree or a seed, it impacts the entire life cycle of that organism. And that is just a little snippet of my presentation. I have a little documentation. I'm not sure if I'm up 3 minutes, but
You're almost there.
okay. So I have a little documentation. I suffer also from AI interference, and because of that, I really limit my presentations now to handwriting. But what I have here is just a little demonstration about climate change and how, when we're talking about climate change, we really need to start to look at markers differently, because people who are spiritually violent will invade the entire organism of a plant. Sorry, I'm up, Bay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're at the end.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
That's all.
If you don't want me to continue, that's fine. But ultimately, what I was wanting was a delegation, because it affects every level of government. When we're talking about climate change, your comment earlier was really important, because we need to understand what to look at when it talks about spiritual violence, because the impact is so massive.
Thank you.
When people take over an organism. Thank you, sorry. I have books I can leave you. You can keep that. And
Yeah, you can leave that
and
for us.
I also have about a list of 7 that I want to charge with crimes against humanity. That's what that is there. And I have their profiles here. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for joining us.
If you have
Need to
questions,
apologize.
it's not allowed.
Was there anyone else who? Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Was there anyone else who wanted to participate in the public participation time? No, okay, very good. Well, it might be one of our delegations.
Oh.
Okay, thank you for joining us. Item 12 on our agenda is the delegations. So we have 3 delegations this evening, and the first one is from BC Transit. I'd like to welcome Danica. Press talk. I think you pressed lock.
There.
Good, okay. And we'll just, I think Sarah's going to put up the, thank you, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, you're good. Good evening, and thanks for having me. I'll start with a brief overview of the BC Transit model and the partnership model before I get into some of the strategic planning work that brings me here today. And I'll move through the presentation pretty quickly. There's a lot of content, and then if there's anything of particular interest that you have questions about or you want me to dive into a little bit deeper, I'd be more than happy to. So I'm Danica White, the Government Relations Manager with BC Transit. I'm the sort of first point of contact for local government partners about all things transit. I'm based out of the headquarters in Victoria, but I travel in the Kootenays a lot, and I've had the pleasure of meeting several of you at different local government events, and happy to see you again tonight. So BC Transit is the provincial crown agency charged with coordinating the delivery of transit across most of BC, with the exception of areas serviced by TransLink and Metro Vancouver. With the current partnership model, BC Transit coordinates service delivery by working closely with local governments, local operators, and the provincial government. And the City of Nelson is uniquely positioned as the local government and the local operator in this partnership arrangement. There's also transit services in and around Nelson that are delivered by another local operator, Next Gen Transit, through a partnership with the Regional District of Central Kootenay. There's several types of transit service that BC Transit delivers, depending on the individual needs of the community. Conventional transit, which includes Nelson Transit, has fixed routes and schedules and works well in sort of urban areas. There's also custom or handy dart service,
that provides door-to-door service for registered customers who are unable to use conventional transit. There's also paratransit service, which is a little bit more flexible in its routing and schedules. And there's also health connections trips, which include the routes that connect Caslow, Nakusp, and Salmo to Nelson. And these are fully funded by Interior Health and largely there to provide connections to customers with for health appointments. So as you're aware, public transit is highly subsidized. The biggest benefit of the BC Transit model is a legislated funding formula. In terms of funding, we have two main formulas. The province provides about 47% of the operating costs for conventional transit. That includes the Nelson Transit system. And 67% of the costs for handy-dart or custom transit systems. Local governments keep 100% of transit revenues, and that helps offset some of the operating costs. And the balance is typically made up through property taxes. So Nelson Transit is part of the West Kootenay Transit System, and the best resource for information for yourselves or for residents about the transit system is through the BC Transit website, and this West Kootenay Transit System has information on fares, holiday schedules, maps, customer contact information if anyone needs support with things like lost and found or booking handy-dart trips. There's also information on some of our new transit programs, particularly that support youth getting comfortable with transit, and also how to access some of the real-time bus location information, such as through this transit app. So the West Kootenay Transit System connects communities over a very large rural area. The Regional District of Central Kootenay, Regional District of Kootenay Boundary, and the City of Nelson are all local government partners that coordinate to deliver this system. There's 4, I'll say, local Nelson routes, although Nelson Transit currently operates some of the trips on the Route 10 and the Route 99. But when I'm sort of talking about Nelson Transit, I'm typically talking about these 4 routes that are the local service in Nelson. So each year we prepare an evaluation of transit performance, including a comparison of other systems of sort of a similar size. So if we're looking here at the Nelson conventional system, the tier average is quite similar to Nelson Transit. I'd like to point out that Nelson Transit performs really well, particularly a lot better than some of the systems sort of a comparable size, particularly when we're looking at some of the KPIs, including operating cost recovery, passenger trips per service hour, total passenger trips, and total revenue. Definitely outperforms peer systems. So I think that's a really great thing to be proud of for Nelson Transit. Although there have been some service delivery challenges for some of the regional routes that are operated by Next Gen Transit, definitely want you to be aware that Nelson Transit is consistently reliable and has great on-time performance and has been delivering 99.8% of scheduled service very consistently. So that's an excellent sort of performance indicator for the transit service that is delivered by the City of Nelson. And I know that there's a lot of public confusion about who is operating the service, and I'm sure that you hear about a lot of the complaints that aren't necessarily the result of what Nelson Transit's delivering. So even with this excellent transit performance, ridership is still recovering from pre-pandemic levels, but trending very well in the right direction. 315,000 rides were delivered in the last fiscal year. This is about 81% of pre-pandemic levels. So provincially, this is provincial ridership. A lot of this is influenced by some of our bigger urban systems. But ridership has been steadily increasing since the pandemic. We look at 2019 as sort of our new benchmark for normal ridership. And we see the sharp drop in ridership in the spring of 2020. Along the bottom of the graph is weeks in the calendar year, so January on the left and December on the right. We see a sharp drop in ridership in the spring of 2020, and then improvements every year after that. The white line, the 2023 line, shows that we are getting quite close now to reaching our pre-pandemic level, sort of as a province. Also, I'll quickly point out that at about week 34, 35, you sort of see a sharp uptick in ridership. That corresponds to the start of the school year, when we typically see a peak. We certainly have seen some capacity challenges on some of our more popular routes, and I anticipate that over the sort of coming weeks and months, some of that demand will taper a little bit, and hopefully we'll have some relief from some of these capacity challenges. So I'll switch gears a little bit and talk about how we go about making changes to a transit system, specifically changes that require additional investment from local governments or the province. So this Kootenay Lake West, Castlegar and area and City of Nelson Transit Future Plan that came out in 2021 is the most recent strategic plan that has been led by BC Transit for the local area. It is publicly available on the website. I'll mention quickly that the Economic Trust of Southern BC also recently released a report on regional ground transportation. BC Transit and local governments were invited to participate and provide input into that report. It has some good recommendations and data, and many that are related to BC Transit partnerships and the partnership model with local governments, but it isn't specifically a BC Transit-led strategic plan. So the Transit Future Plan that came out in 2021 was developed during COVID. So it's sort of a living document. We're aware that a lot of things have shifted in the sort of transportation game since then, but it is relatively recent. And it does reflect a significant amount of public and stakeholder input from workshops, open houses, and online surveys. In total, over 1,600 people participated in the development of that strategic plan. So the plan identified several different service changes that were considered critical or sort of the highest priority to implement. And you'll notice it mentioned including adding trips to the 99 and 98, which were recognized to be at sort of capacity even several years ago, and that are sort of the backbone of the regional system. It also identified several other sort of shorter term priorities that were intended to be implemented in the coming years. A lot of things have sort of stalled over COVID, so we're really picking things back up this year and reassessing those critical and short term priorities. As ridership returns to pre-pandemic levels, we're certainly seeing some of these pressures on some of these routes and the need for these to be implemented again, including more trips on the 99 and 98. The strategic plan also identifies some infrastructure priorities, including a couple for Nelson. And my apologies, I've highlighted the Downtown Trail Exchange, and it should be the Downtown Nelson Exchange. But a lot of these are well underway. So I mentioned that several of these priorities that came out of public consultation and were put into the strategic plan are underway, like adding additional service to the system. And this transit improvement program is sort of the process that we go by to introduce these changes. So every winter, we start an annual process of reviewing strategic plans, public feedback from local operators and ridership trends. And then I work with local government staff to identify priorities so that we can keep service levels aligned with demand. These expansion proposals are initially presented at the West Kootenay Transit Committee for discussion and revision and any other sort of ideas or needs that are brought to the table. Nelson Transit was not seen to be needing any additional service expansion sort of urgently for the next year, but several initiatives were brought forward for our local government partners, the Central Kootenay and Kootenay boundary. So once they're sort of discussed at the West Kootenay Transit Committee, they move to the different boards or city councils for funding approval. Then we submit a request to the province as part of a sort of broader service plan to seek matching funding for these initiatives. That typically happens in October. So right now we're at the tail end of confirming financial support from local governments. Following confirmation of the provincial budget in February, we start the sort of implementation process. So right now we are putting together all of the different sort of expansion priorities that local governments are committed to funding, rolling them all up, making that request to the province, and then we find out in February whether we've secured that funding for these expansion initiatives. Then after February, we sort of start the planning and implementation for getting that additional service on the road. So the takeaway from this sort of annual process is that timelines for making changes to the system are quite long. This is often sort of an 18-month process to work it through the whole system. And any time that we are identifying an additional operating cost need from a local government or the province, it's sort of a one-time ask to secure that funding. Once we've secured that additional funding, then it moves into that cost share model, so it keeps going annual. So you only have to make these funding requests once when you want to add additional service. All right. Oops. Gone too far. So I'll wrap up by just mentioning a couple sort of local transit initiatives that are happening right now. First is the Nelson Transit Exchange. So planning for the new exchange is well underway. Federal funding has been secured and construction should be starting in the spring with a plan for it to be in service next summer. About a year ago, all buses in the West Kootenay Transit system were outfitted with a new technology that allows customers to use the transit app or another trip planning app on their phone to see real-time bus locations and along routes and predicted arrival times at any bus stop. These are just a couple screen grabs that I pulled from trying it out on my phone, so you can see the type of information that customers are able to get to hopefully make riding transit a better, easier, more reliable experience. And this is a similar type of technology that people are getting used to from things like Uber or other ride-sharing apps. It brings a lot of comfort when you can see where the bus is and when it's approaching.
Councillor Page introduced me to the app, is that okay with you?
Yeah, she only has one slide left.
He introduced me to the app. It's amazing. I love it because I can sit here and just do a quick check to get home and figure out whether I need to run for the bus or whether I can saunter along. And if I saunter along and I should have been running, it's like another hour. Mm-hmm. So I'm walking home by then because it's only 13 minutes, but it's a little bit uphill. So awesome app. If you don't have the app and you are a frequent transit rider and you do have the technology to access it, highly, highly recommended. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And it's the transit app. It looks like a little sideways S symbol. There's other trip planning apps out there. A lot of people have good luck with Google Transit, but the transit app is sort of the BC Transit endorsed app. Also really great in sort of inclement weather, especially if the bus is running late. Always nice for people to know if it's 2 minutes late or if they've missed it. The next big thing that's coming is UMA, which is the electronic fare collection system. So this will allow customers to use their mobile device or a reloadable card to validate their fare instead of buying sort of a paper fare product or a monthly pass. Some of the big perks are customers will be able to sort of automatically subscribe to a monthly pass, so they don't have to go out every month and purchase one, or they can just keep sort of some money on their card to be using if they're more of a casual rider. Cash fares will continue to be accepted, and there certainly will be a transition period as we're getting people used to UMO and sort of away from the paper products. You'll see a lot more of this sort of in early 2024 as we're getting closer to rolling it out, more marketing and public engagement going on in the area. And that's all I had, but I'd be happy to get into anything in more detail or answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Danica. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. Through the chair. I was curious, and I don't know if you're going to answer this or possibly the CAO. When we get our new transit exchange up and running, the equipment that we're installing to make that a transit exchange, is that, as it ages, are we responsible for what's there, or do we get help from BC Transit to keep it updated and looking good? And
I can answer
some of that.
Yeah. So the way it works is BC Transit builds that and actually owns that asset. It's their asset for, I want to say 15 years. Kind of that life of the asset, expected life of the asset. So they would be, responsible for repairing any like significant damage to it or anything. But there would be an agreement that we would keep it clean, remove the trash, that kind of snow clearing, that type of piece, right? So that's kind of how the arrangement would work. They've applied for the grant and received the grant, so it's their asset.
Okay.
And we would be maintaining this.
so just to, like, say a window gets smashed in one of the bus shelters, or graffiti, or something, gets pushed over and wrecked, like, so you're saying BC Transit will...
Those are great questions, and there's actually there's an asset benefit agreement and operating agreement that we have to work out the details for. So those are some good questions on all those little pieces. In this case, who would be responsible? I do know basic, like I say, trash removal, snow clearing. That's us. But some of those other things, that's some great questions that we'll have to figure out the details on. Yeah.
Just because it's a new asset, it'd be great to keep it in great shape. It's going to be an awesome benefit for our town to have people be able to smoothly transition. But keeping it look nice over the long haul would be great. Thank you.
Other questions? Councillor Payne.
Is the Bus Ready program new? I'm just not familiar with it. Have I missed it, or is it something we should be highlighting more?
Respectfully through the chair, it has been running for a couple years in various different forms.
Okay.
A lot of it is based online. I think last year you had a big bus wrap in the area on one of your buses to sort of promote it locally. This year, I haven't heard anything about bus wraps, but it is more of a focus on having online resources for parents and educators to drive them to a website that has a lot of resources and videos that are geared towards a more youth audience, to get them familiar with taking the bus, etiquette, and to try and create lifelong transit users starting from a younger age.
That's what we are trying to do. So thanks.
Yeah, and I think we're pretty fortunate because we don't have a lot of school busing in Nelson proper because of distances. A lot of our students get introduced to transit unless they have parents that like to drive them to school, but that gets tiring after a while. So I think we, probably that reflects in some of our user numbers, is that we do get kids on transit pretty early here in Nelson.
If there's no further questions, we can receive the report, and thank you for coming.
Actually,
go ahead.
We did have a bit of a discussion
Yeah.
earlier, and one of the things that has been identified is just recruitment of drivers, and just curious, is that a field that BC Transit is involved with? I know they run, transit in Victoria. It was really more of a discussion, instead of having all our communities trying to invent how we recruit transit drivers. Is there like a program? Here's the type of folks we target. Here's where we've been successful. Here's the marketing material. Here's any of that. So I'm just curious if what you do in Victoria to recruit, is that some of that available to us other operators on strategies to recruit drivers and share what kind of career that looks like and what the opportunities are, etc. So that was just a bit of a discussion we had.
Through the chair, it's the recruitment of operators is one of the sort of official roles of the operating company. BC Transit is certainly available to support, has a lot of experience. It's a very different, I think, recruitment landscape in Victoria than some of the challenges that might be occurring locally. We did happen to have a good discussion about that at the Transit Committee earlier today, and some creative solutions were sort of put forward. I know that we can link recruitment on the BC Transit website to sort of draw people, but I think a lot of the success comes from more local promotion of, at local job fairs or local job boards, to try and raise awareness about opportunities in the area. So I don't have anything
Prepackaged
collateral,
print collateral.
to support operating companies or the City of Nelson with recruitment. We've done in Victoria anyway. I know they have hiring bonuses and they've tried a lot of different things, but it's still a challenge that we're seeing in lots of different parts of the province right now.
Thank you. Councillor Page?
Yeah, appreciate the presentation. I find myself wondering, now that the Future Services Plan was done in 2021, is that correct? And so we have the ETSI ground transportation study that's now been completed out of the Southern Economic Trust, and a number of recommendations coming out of that, including additional provincial supports, hopefully for inter-community travel and harmonization of the technology, which I believe the UMO product is intending to partially solve. So I'm wondering where these learnings and recommendations coming out of the trust, which I believe the province is going to be leaning on to try to make larger decisions, are going to get woven into our future services plan for the parts where BC Transit has a role to play, and how those two planning exercises will find alignment.
Through the chair, they're sort of done at different scales. The ETSI report is more proposing sort of different policy shifts or funding models, and looking more broadly at the gaps in regional transit. The West Canadian Transit sort of system and the strategic planning work that was done was much more local, and much more about the needs of the existing sort of system and tweaks to the existing routes. We certainly try and marry them where we can, and I think maybe the biggest benefit of the ETSI report is that if initiatives are coming forward for local governments to consider, this is one more, the ETSI BC report and the engagement that was done in that is one more piece of information to provide informed decision making and to sort of validate what communities are needing and where transportation gaps are on sort of a different scale.
Okay.
If there's no further questions, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I can ask.
You're welcome to stay.
She's got to get dinner.
Thanks very much. Our next delegation is from the Kootenay Conservation Program.
That's what I thought.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. And are you controlling the PowerPoint?
Okay, I'm just gonna set you up and then you just hit the arrow button and.
Perfect. Thank you.
Juliet Craig is joining us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me as a delegation tonight. It's nice to see everybody. I'm Juliet Craig. I'm the program director for the Kootenay Conservation Program, and I'm here with Kendall Benish, who is the local conservation fund coordinator for KCP. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Kootenay Conservation Program works within the traditional unceded territories of the Silks Okanagan, Sinixt, Secwepemc, and Ktunaxa nations. And you may remember that you may recall I came here last year on a delegation about the local conservation fund service, but I know that there's some new folks since the election.
Some changes.
And some changes. So today I wanted to provide a refresher on what the local conservation fund service is and how it works and functions in local government, and then some of the recent expansion activities that we've been involved in over the last year and the opportunity for the City of Nelson to become involved. So the Kootenay Conservation Program is a partnership of 85 organizations that focus on conservation in our region. So that includes local, provincial, federal government, First Nations, agricultural producers, nonprofit societies, from rod and gun clubs to stewardship groups to land trusts, all kinds of folks from the region. And our mandate is to coordinate and facilitate conservation efforts on private land and to generate the support and resources needed to maintain this effort. So towards this mandate, we've been involved in the local conservation fund service in our program, both working with local governments to establish it and then continue to administer it. So a local conservation fund is a local government service, and it creates a dedicated funding pot to support conservation projects of on-the-ground conservation actions. And it's based on a parcel or property tax, depending on the local government. And it really is designed to support local priorities for the region where it's established. And the funds can only be used in the service area, the broad service area where it's collected. So the model's based on the service in the regional district of East Kootenay that KCP helped start through a referendum in 2008. And there was nothing like it in Canada at the time. And it started with a 10-year sunset clause. And then before 2018, it was removed altogether and considered really successful. And then in 2014, KCP worked with the RDCK to establish the service area in electoral areas A, D, and E around Kootenay Lake. Those are the areas that went to referendum, and it passed in 2014. So between 2016 and 2022, there's been 44 grants issued from this funding pot to a total of over $500,000. And so it as a local government service, it shows up on the parcel or your property taxes. In this region, it's a parcel tax, so it shows up as a line item of $15 per parcel per year that goes into the dedicated fund. And then nonprofit societies or First Nations or local governments can actually apply to the fund through an application form. The proposals are reviewed by a volunteer committee of technical experts who provide recommendations, and then ultimately the decision of which projects to fund falls on elected officials. So in the pooled service, each electoral area or municipality would have one representative on that decision-making body to decide which projects to support. And as I mentioned, it's a pooled fund, so it all goes into one pot. And generally speaking, it's based on the concept that we're sort of all in this together. So what happens in one part of Kootenay Lake affects other parts of Kootenay Lake. And in the Columbia Valley and the East Kootenay, there's 3 municipalities and 2 regional district electoral areas that make up the fund service. And it all sort of works out in the end. You know, there's projects in some geographic areas some years and others in other areas other years. And that's part of what the elected officials may consider in the decision-making process.
I think Councillor Page might have a question.
I can,
Oh, do you want to wait?
I
Okay,
can wait.
I gotcha.
Okay.
Thanks.
And so KCP plays a role. We have an agreement with the RDCK to take the administrative burden off the local government. So we have a website and we do the call for proposals. We put ads in the paper. We do the media around it. We bring together the technical review committee and support the report of recommendations and track the projects and the project reporting and the project success, et cetera. And there's been such a broad range of amazing projects that have been supported. A lot of big funders in the region, like Columbia Basin Trust and Fish and Wildlife Compensation Program, don't fund projects, generally speaking, on private land. And they also really like to see leveraged funding. So if a local project has a little bit of money and they're looking for more, larger funders tend to like that and contribute to the projects. And the funds really bring capacity to local organizations. There's been some organizations really struggling to continue going, and they do good work that benefits everyone, and this type of fund really helps support their work. So just a few examples of projects that could relate to the City of Nelson, if it were to be included, is reducing human-wildlife conflict. So this is a 50-50 cost share program with private landowners and grizzly bear corridors to protect their livestock or poultry or fruit trees. There's projects on invasive plant and invasive species management. There's projects to create pollinator meadows in people's backyards, and we know pollinators are really important for biodiversity as well as local food production. There's been support for local land acquisition projects like the upland part of Cottonwood Lake, which is in electoral area E, and other really important wildlife habitat has been supported by local conservation funds. Water monitoring, both quantity of water and quality of water, which we know is getting more and more important, and it gives real-time information to local governments who are making decisions around water. Wetland and other restoration projects, including fire restoration. This is Sunshine Bay Regional Park in Harrop. There was a project with a local rod and gun club to remove a barrier in Able Creek in Invermere, and that allowed the first passage of kokanee salmon in that creek. And really it can support a lot of local priorities. So what the public really appreciates is they're spending this money for projects in their own backyards. And it leverages an incredible amount of funding. As I mentioned, there's been over about $535,000 generated from taxpayer revenue in this fund service area since 2014. And that's leveraged over $2.45 million in additional funders and in-kind support for these projects. And this funding is spent locally for local businesses, for materials and supplies, for contractors, and a lot of different economic benefits. And it's been such an amazing service and regarded so highly in the province that the Okanagan established this local conservation funds in the South Okanagan in 2016 and the North Okanagan in 2020. And things, as we know, it's getting even more important as the years go by. So it's very timely with the issues that local governments and local communities are trying to address. So we've been hearing from other communities all around the Kootenays that they want this local conservation fund service. And we, last fall, Slocan Valley residents in electoral area H went to referendum to decide if they would want to join the service. There were 7 electoral areas in the RDCK that wanted this service, but we're very strategic with KCP and we want to do a good job in outreach and education and information sharing. So we were supporting the referendum in area H first. And it passed by 66%, which was the largest support the referendum had for any of the local conservation funds. And even with economic struggles and other issues we're facing since COVID, people really see conservation as a priority. And interestingly, our market research polling indicated 67% support in the Slocan Valley. So that referendum result was right on target with what we had predicted. And we also did market research polling in the Kootenay Lake area. So these are the areas that didn't already have a fund. So this indicates Nelson, Caslow, and Area F. And we found, again, 67% support in our market research polling. So because of this, Director Newell with Area F wants to have this service in this area. And we know that referendums are very expensive and time consuming, so he's used the alternative approval process. So basically the local government indicates this is something they'd like to do, and if more than 10% of the electorate votes or registers that they're against it, then it can be considered to have public support. So for Area F, it required 338 electors to write in opposition of this service, and they got one. So that passed on September, or had indicated support on September 5th and went to the board, the RDCK board this month. And so now this service has expanded to Area F. So we're excited about that. For municipalities, they can join this service through a referendum, through the alternative approval process, or through a municipal council resolution. So there's another option for municipalities. So I just wanted to raise this idea again and see if there was interest. I'm not asking anything in the delegation tonight, just for information sharing, to see if the City of Nelson was interested in either joining the service or establishing a service in the City of Nelson. We have so much information on our website at kootenayconservation.ca, and I do have booklets. I think I passed them out last time, but for those who didn't get any, you're welcome to take one and or have them in your office. And things like the terms of reference and frequently asked questions documents and examples of projects are all on the website. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet. Councillor Page.
Thanks, Juliet. It's a pleasure to have you here again, and having seen the conversation at the RDCK, I would at this time like to move to refer the request to join the Kootenay Conservative Program to a future business meeting in January.
I will second that.
Is there discussion on the motion?
I don't think there's discussion
No
on
discussion
referral.
on the floor?
Am I right?
You need a vote?
We've moved and seconded,
What it's
so
called.
Yeah.
What's you call
So,
it?
sorry,
You call the vote.
I will call the vote. Thanks. You didn't want to discuss it at all? We don't have any discussion on a motion?
It's not.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's a referral. I misheard. Awesome. All those in favor? Okay, that passes. It carries. So we will refer to a business meeting in January, and I think there's probably some other questions for Juliet.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Lochtenberg.
Yeah, Juliet, thank you for that. I'm excited to see this expand, including here in Nelson. Just a couple of questions on the percentage of funds raised ending in, say, administration versus projects themselves. So I have one question, then a follow-up on that. So do you have
Through
that?
the chair, we have an agreement with the RDCK for 9% of the requisition.
Okay.
So that's what the Kootenay Conservation Program uses, and we pay for the print ads and the time for organizing and that sort of thing. In addition, the RDCK has administrative time of their staff, and I don't know what that adds up to, but that's what we as KCP take for the administrative fee.
Great.
But the majority of funds certainly end up in the projects on the ground.
Nice supplemental.
Yes.
Thank you, through the chair. So that seems eminently reasonable to me. And then, so from that, if I'm understanding correctly, let's say we join, would we be pooling our funds with the region, and then we would have one seat on that evaluation committee, or did I have that right?
That's how it works in the Columbia Valley. So each municipality has one seat, and then the two electoral areas have one seat. So that is a decision-making table. It would be interesting in such a large municipality like the City of Nelson. With the smaller municipalities, they don't have enough revenue to have their own service, so it is all pooled. And we do recommend that because a bear moves through Nelson, or the water quality monitoring affects Nelson too. But that is because I believe there's 5,000 properties in Nelson around, and it's $15 per parcel. So each property is generally a parcel. That would be the revenue generated. And it would be pooled. And so this is a question of how it will be decided. You know, if it depends where the strongest proposals come from on a technical side, and the technical review committee ranks those, and there's really amazing expertise in this region who sits at that table. And so they're ranked, and that's what comes to the local government. But the local government officials you may decide that you want to consider more geographic equity, or there's certain really important issues that you want to address with this certain project. So those are the kinds of discussions that happen at the decision-making table.
Great. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Woodward?
So this is sort of a stab in the dark, but could we work on having our watershed more secure through this system?
Falls in a provincial park, so parks is responsible for conservation in the park. I don't know if you do.
I guess my question is, like, could we strengthen, like, for example, what happened with Cottonwood Lake? It was not secure, and then through a credible effort, it was secured. You were part of that. So I'm just curious, our water source is, it's like we don't own that asset, that natural asset in 5 Mile Basin, right?
Yeah, it's on Crown land.
It's on Crown land, right?
Yeah.
So-
and then, we have 3 watersheds, right? Anderson, Sellis, and 5 Mile. 5 Miles in West Arm Provincial Park, so Parks has responsibility for those lands, Sellis and
I guess
Anderson.
my question is, could we secure more of our natural assets around Nelson through this process?
So as according to the terms of reference now, if it's an on-the-ground conservation project, so it could be land acquisition that has conservation benefit. It doesn't have to be on private property or City of Nelson land. There are projects that occur on the provincial government lands, as long as they don't relieve the provincial government of its responsibilities. Things like Fire Smart is protecting buildings, but there's an ecological aspect to that of thinning forests that should be thinned, and the fire history of an area. So that could be relevant to conservation. Okay. Water monitoring, or like water quality monitoring would be a relevant one. Something like supporting the actual water filtering system or something like that probably wouldn't be eligible according to this current terms of reference. Okay. I'm just
Cottonwood Creek.
Cottonwood Creek restoration, for example, Duck Bay,
Right.
Those kind of restoration projects. And then there needs to be an organization that wants to do that work. So that's the sort of what goes hand in hand, is both what the local government is interested in having done, and then what the capacity is locally. And what this does is generate that capacity, because there's actually funding for groups. Obviously, there's nonprofit societies in this region that do amazing work that might be interested in those kind of things. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm trying to just grapple with, like, what's possible, what's not possible with something like this. So, but thank you.
Councillor Leuchtenberg.
I just had another question that Councillor Woodward sort of raised in my mind, and it's regarding our strategic priorities as a council and how we set environmental conservation and support and support for the ecosystem and generally the environment in which our municipality lives, and yet we struggled with finding what that means or how to act, operationalize those values. And what I really like about this is it starts to loop us in to that, because I think a lot of it's happening kind of in the community already. It's being led by volunteers. They're not getting support from the municipality at the degree that we would like to support them, and this kind of ties it together really well. And on top of that, one of the things we've had come before us is this getting Nelson to become a bird-friendly city, and that reminded me again of that conservation. As we start to do this, we start to see more opportunities to integrate our local ecosystem more fully into the community itself. And I think this is, in my mind, it's a step it's a necessary step that's going to open up a lot of doors for us to be more engaged. So maybe I don't have a question. I just, I'm enthusiastic about this. So.
May I make a comment?
Yeah.
And just tying into what you said, that when it was designed in 2006 for the 2008 referendum, there was nothing like it. So they didn't really, there was a lot of discussion on how to design it. But it was ultimately designed on the IUCN conservation targets, which are global targets for conservation, and those threats, which are global threats like invasive species or development or disruption of natural ecosystem processes or land loss of biodiversity, those kind of things. So it's a very much a think globally, act locally type of fund. Mm-hmm. And so the application form, for example, you have to say which IUCN threat you're addressing in your project. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's down at the local scale, but it does mean you're contributing to that broader picture. And I think that's why another reason it's been so successful is it's working at multiple levels. And there's also been really interesting projects that would never have started without the local conservation fund that have now become provincial. One example is Farmland Advantage, which basically pays contracts to farmers to recognize that they're caretaking ecological assets on their property through looking after their wetlands or streams, and they get a contract as a farmer knowing that they might lose a bit of forage land near the wetland, and they get $1,000 a year for that. And that's just taken off provincially with the importance of agricultural land tied into conservation. So there's really innovative projects that end up happening because there's this little funding source. I shouldn't say little, I mean, but it's not giant grants that are out there. They're usually anywhere from $6,000 to $15,000 a grant, but it does add up over time.
That's great.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Councilor Woodward.
So it's like invasive species within the city limits.
Yes.
Would that be, could we tackle that with this rather than using our own funds?
Is that, what kind of funding has been earmarked for those type of projects?
So that would be probably an organization like the Central Kootenay Invasive Species Society would apply, and they did do that. For example, they had that project in, they can't include Caslo because it's not in the service, but the electoral area D. So they did a cost share program with landowners for knotweed, for example. They did one training landowners who live on the lake to look out for purple loosestrife and yellow flag iris. So there's definitely opportunities with that type of approach.
Councilor Page.
Through the chair to staff, it has me wondering, because currently this conservation fund is actualized inside of the RDCK only, if we were to proceed down and join, would this be something we would put on our tax rolls and put forward, or would we send this to the regional district for it to be included, us to be included in their service? Or would these be the options you guys would consider when this comes back in January?
Yeah, do you know, are those individual services, like F has its own service, or did they join a
in the
larger
Columbia
service?
Valley, which is including municipalities and regional districts, it's through the regional district, but
Right.
it's all one pooled service. So
Okay.
they essentially joined the regional district service. I believe it's the same in the South Okanagan and North Okanagan,
Okay.
which also includes municipalities. It hasn't been done yet in the West Kootenay, so there's interest from Caslo and potentially Silverton, but it hasn't. At this point, we're sort of in this information sharing stage, and so I'm not entirely clear on the process. It was my understanding that the RDCK could issue a letter to the City of Nelson to invite the city to join the service, or the City of Nelson could write a letter to the RDCK to request to join the service. And then the terms of reference is where the details would get really discussed and finalized.
Yeah, so we can definitely explore that. Sounds like both options.
It's my recollection
available.
that we're currently running one service, and we've added areas as they've ascended into the one service, which is where the terms of reference and the management agreement all deal with the actual legwork your organization is doing. So I imagine it would be something similar unless we wanted to do our own thing. Which no.
If there's no further questions, then we can thank our guest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Juliet.
Our third delegation this evening is Kutenai Art Therapy. You can come on up. Oh, goodness. I have two chairs.
Did we lose a chair?
Where did we lose the chair?
Thank you for joining us. I think there's two microphones there, so you can each have one if you like. You click the lock button so that you don't have to hold the talk button. And thank you for coming.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for having us this evening. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Lisa Heisler, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kutenai Art Therapy Institute, and I'm joined today by Terence Huey, who's our Board Chair. So our intention today is to tell you about who we are and what we do, just to familiarize yourselves with us. I believe we've been to a delegation a number of years back, but it's been some time, so there's likely been turnover since then. We'd like to share some of our challenges, what we're up against, and to request your support or consideration going forward. So this is our mission statement here. We're dedicated to the belief that the creative process is healing and life-enhancing, and that the expressive arts contribute therapeutically to individual and community health. Dedicated to training competent, culturally sensitive, and responsive art therapists, and to providing art therapy as a community service. So there's a twofold mission there. We train art therapists, and we're also very engaged in art therapy as a community service. Just a little bit more about us there. So we've been a nonprofit since 1995 and had our charitable status since 1996. We offer a comprehensive post-baccalaureate diploma program in art therapy and have both a campus and a distance combined program. And we're also active in schools, community settings, youth centers, senior centers, hospitals, etc. We've been contracted by MCFD, the Ministry of Children and Family Development, for the past 20 or so years to offer services for teens as well as parents. I won't kind of go through the fine print there, but just to give you some sense of our accreditation, a couple of highlights. We're accredited through the Private Training Institute branch of BC, through the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training. And we adhere to the Canadian Art Therapy Association's standards of practice. Again, just kind of giving you a sense of, who we are and what we do. This is a bit about the learning approaches that we stick to. So really relational, ecological, rooted in social justice, trauma-informed. These are some of the guiding values that guide our pedagogy and curriculum, and that we filter decision-making through. Eco-art therapy is something that has been important to the school since it was founded. As part of our roots, and something that we're wanting to grow more towards as eco-grief is surfacing more and more, and in the face of some of what our previous delegates have talked about, the changes that we're all dealing with. At Katie, we teach and practice an approach to art therapy that attends to all of our relationships, ourselves, one another, the land, the natural world. Another initiative that we're proud of is the Groundwater Initiative. So 9 years ago, the Institute launched the Groundwater Initiative to advocate for Indigenous-centered art therapy. We do have, quite a few Indigenous students, so 15 to 20% of Katie's current student cohorts identify as Indigenous. So we're really, through our students, very much living our response to truth and reconciliation and the calls for action. And some of the ways that we do that, certainly not an exhaustive list, but we've really been focused on hiring Indigenous staff. So we have 6 Indigenous and Métis staff members and 1 Indigenous board member. And we're also focused on decreasing some of the barriers to education, so have implemented a number of scholarships for BIPOC and Indigenous students. Cultural competency and a culturally safe curriculum is, yes, continually, we're looking at that and reworking our curriculum content. And really enjoy working with a number of elders that support the students, but also support the leadership, myself included. So I believe the last time that we were before you, we were speaking about a master's program. So right now we've got, our diploma program in place, but really would like to be able to offer a master's program. It's something that we've been working towards for quite a few years now. And we'd just like to share a little bit about our journey towards master's accreditation. So our current program does meet the CATA educational standards for our master's program. And we've, done our market research, and it's quite clear that there's an interest and that we do have students that would gladly enroll if it were to be offered. In our most recent application, which was in 2022, Katie met 16 out of the 18 criteria, and some of those were with conditions. So the application goes to the Ministry of Advanced Education through a board called the Degree Quality Assessment Board. And this panel, assesses where Katie is on these criteria. And as I say, it was a strong application, but there were a number of areas where the panel felt that, we needed some more work. And that was primarily our financial capacity. And so, it's a challenge as a nonprofit with charitable status to really have that reserve where they're looking for at the DQAB level. And so we believe that were we to own our own building, which is what we're striving towards, it would provide us what we need for financial capacity, and it would be a substantial asset on our balance sheet, increasing our revenue significantly. So we've been operating for 28 years now with no external financial support, or a little bit in the way of grants, but primarily our funding source has been tuition. And we know that a graduate accreditation would enable us to increase our fees and provide a more stable long-term financial basis for our work and for our growth. So we're in a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario around the financial piece and financial stability. So we're really hoping that moving towards acquiring our own building will resolve some of that. And that brings us to the building here, which is where we currently rent. We've occupied the building for about 10 years now, and it's 191 Baker Street. We have a wonderful arrangement with our current landlord, who's basically said, take as long as you need to fundraise the money. It can be a year, it can be 7 years. And just, recognizes the value in what we do and wants to support us on our fundraising initiatives. So that's what we're moving towards this fall, is launching a fundraising campaign in the hopes of purchasing the building. So our intention is to raise 75% of the purchase price, and we've given ourselves about 18 months to get there. So we'd like to see if we're making, good traction rather than kind of dragging it out over a 7-year period. We've given ourselves 18 months to take a good dent out of it. So if we can achieve our goal, we expect that we'll generate an additional $55,000 annually from rental income over and above our current income. And this would meet the financial security requirement for the Degree Quality Assessment Board. And, perhaps more importantly, allow us to provide more art therapy to the community in the years to come. So some of our wonders for council, and I'm not sure what the most appropriate way to kind of put them forward is, but I'll share them, and then perhaps the chair can guide that later. But a wonder is whether there are any capital grants that council is aware of that may help us, whether Katie could apply for permissive tax exemption on property taxes. We have a wonder around that. Whether there's recommendations for fundraising or recommendations to support that initiative. And another query that we had was, we're aware that at times council has been able to support nonprofits with acquiring city-owned lands or city-owned buildings. And so while we're moving towards 191 Baker and that fundraising campaign, also just have a curiosity about whether there are any city-owned buildings that perhaps we could be exploring as well. Perhaps the Andrew Street building, we're aware of that one. So our goal is to be the first private institution in Canada to offer a master's degree in art therapy. And we believe this would be a feather in Nelson's cap, offering unique, values-based education right here in Nelson. To achieve this goal, as you're aware, we need an asset or something different towards Katie's financial security. I'd like to talk just a little bit more about our community work, and Katie is a community anchor. So we're very active in the community. I heard the mention earlier of Katie or Nelson as a bird-friendly city, and we had done some of the workshops around that. So just doing art together, imagining what it would look like and be like to have Nelson as a bird-friendly city, excuse me. So there's lots of opportunities like that where we're engaging with the community, hearing their needs and wishes and finding a way to move art through it. Arts and cultural spaces are really important, to every city, and we feel like Nelson or Katie is really that community hub where their art making is something that's accessible by everybody. You don't need any special expertise to come in and make art. It's something for all ages, all people. And so, we've really see it as a community service. This is just a photo of one of the initiatives that we did, Bright Lights with the Salvation Army, which worked with some of Nelson's Living Rough community members, and it was very, very well received. So we offer thousands of hours of free or by donation art therapy to the community every year. And certainly, the need has exceeded our capacity. We're very aware of the growing need for low-cost therapeutic help in rural communities. And we continue to meet this by offering open studios and workshops, and our students offer quite a bit of support. But we'd like to be able to do more, and we need more capacity to be able to move in that direction. So that brings me to the close of the presentation. Art therapy remains an emerging discipline in Canada. So there's 3 programs across Canada, one in BC, master's programs that is, one in BC, one in Alberta, and one in Quebec. But there's no doctoral level programs or undergraduate programs. It's very well established in both the United States and the UK. Art therapy, it helps individuals and communities with trauma and grief, and finding tools for finding, meaning and purpose in life. So now more than ever, there's a need for programs that prepare therapists to be of service. You know, we live in some distressing times, and Katie really, you know, would like to continue doing the work that we're doing, preparing art therapists to, so support us as we move through all that's ahead. Terrence, is there anything that you wanted to add? Yeah.
I'd just like to say, first of all, a big thank you to allowing us to come here. I really appreciate the opportunity. I've been involved with Katie for 6 years. First of all, as executive director for a year and a half, and then as a chair of the board for almost a year now. And it's been very inspiring to see what happens to mostly young women coming to the program and being transformed by their experience of doing art therapy and going out. Not only there's a lot of art therapists here in Nelson who are employed community services and so on, but across Canada. And it's just incredibly inspiring to see what happens because, as Lisa's saying, there's enormous need for people to deal with their trauma, their anxiety, and to get inspired in their creativity, you know, these days, like to have a different way of approaching, a different relationship to the land. The piece around the land is really important to us, you know, a different relationship to the land. It was beautiful to hear this lady talking before us, but having fundamentally changing our relationship with the land is absolutely essential to what we do at Katie. And really what we're asking of you is there any ideas you have of how we can be supported to do this? Because if we can purchase, the landlord came to us and said, I'm ready to sell it to you. If we can buy this building, we're in the ballpark to be able to get to offer a master's degree. And will be a huge step forward for us, you know. We've gone for 25 years. We've somehow managed to get through it. And it's, you know, we feel like it's time to really deepen our roots and get stronger now. And we feel we can do it. So big thank you to all of you for just listening. Thanks.
Councillor Page and then Councillor Woodward.
Yeah, thank you for giving us the update on the programming you guys are providing. There are potentially places that a conversation could be had with staff on some of the opportunities around the city. So I would encourage you to talk to Development Services and have those discussions. One thing that does come to mind, I recall the collaborative work that Katie did with the Creative Exchange when those ideas were being floated around for the old property up in Rosemont. And one of the, having been involved in that process and with my work over at the investment co-op, is how much funding was seemingly available for a co-op model, and thinking about how you exist within your space now. And I believe there are tenants that also share the space. You may want to explore what it would look like to wrap such a project in a co-op model in terms of acquiring the property, because it may unlock things in the Upper Columbia co-op. What is that term for that? There's both national, provincial, and regional co-op support systems specifically to help people acquire land and create that long-term sustainability. So it may be a way you want to structure the land piece or the building piece to consider. And those Creative Exchange contacts can give back in that way with knowledge.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. Through the chair. I guess my first is a very obvious question, but I mean, have you gone to the banks and like, will they? I mean, you guys are a very successful long-term school. You must have value there that you could get a loan or a line of credit. And I was also thinking on similar lines to Councillor Page that the two other businesses that are in this building right now, if you all work together to acquire the asset, I don't know what their situation is like, but that could lessen the burden on you as an individual organization. Plus, if you purchase this building, then of course you're responsible. It's a depreciating asset, and things get really expensive on big buildings, as we know, because we deal with that all the time for city-owned buildings. So I would say, like, if I were sitting on your board, I would definitely be trying to do a cost benefit on long-term asset management of this building. And whether or not you can actually afford, a roof replacement or something like that. So, I guess I would just caution not to get too fixated on ownership and possibly other models that might work better, which might also still unlock the potential for a master's degree. But I would say one thing I've learned in this job is asset ownership is very complicated and expensive.
I hear you. Yeah, we've done a pro forma on it, and one of the things that happened actually in the last few months is the landlord replaced the roof, which was a big plus for us.
Okay, that's great. That's
But
great.
there will be more. No.
There, obviously, yes.
It's an old building.
Councillor Lochtenberg.
Yeah, and I just want to say you've got some smart people, talented people on the board that I'm sure has looked at that too, although the point's well taken. A couple things come to mind that I think we probably shouldn't talk about here, but we'll maybe have a conversation after this meeting with the CAO that I'd love to chat about. The second thing is just so I can understand, what do you imagine the potential enrollment? So what size are we talking about? Would this, let's say you did unlock a master's and then potentially even a PhD, is this building in your sights for size, or could this grow to be a big, exciting program that might require more than just this?
Yeah, I mean, sure. So, the program, when we've done our forecasting, we're very clear that some moderate growth would be good for the program, but we don't want to see any kind of accelerated growth, because so much of what makes the program what it is that it's the quality of the instructor intention, the small cohorts. We wouldn't see ourselves ballooning in terms of size to maintain the quality and integrity of the educational model that.
Okay, so this building, what I'm hearing then is more than enough for the size you want to grow.
Absolutely.
So
It
you
would
wouldn't
be,
be looking for.
Yeah, there's 10,000 square feet, and we have the second floor. The yoga studio, Bamboo, has most of downstairs, and Edward Jones has the other part.
Right.
And then there's a tenant in the basement.
Right, and the 10,000 on the second floor is more than enough for you.
Yeah. For us right now, I mean, I think if in time we could take over the Edward Jones space, they're looking at moving out, and that would give us more. We can move the offices downstairs, and we'd have more room for open studios and more room for counseling and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that would really work for us.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that helps in terms of just thinking through ideas.
But I think one thing I do want to address is this, just like to echo what Lisa's just said, is that we're not interested in just growing the program and having more and more students. It's very, at the end of 2 years, every student does a personal case study of what they've been through in the previous 2 years. And they put their art out, they talk about it, they bring all their friends and their family in, and the teachers and so on. Everybody is there to witness their process. It's a very personal process, and it's very powerful to watch that. So, for us, if we can maintaining the quality, having the asset on the balance sheet would make a huge difference. It's very clear. The Ministry of Education is, their number one concern is, if you shut down, we don't want a lot of angry students on our doorstep.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's it. That's the way the world works.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, for us, if we can get an asset like this, if we can raise $2 million and, do this, then things will change.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
sorry, just so just to be clear on the co-op thing and others, you are a registered charity.
Yes, we are.
And so if I donated to Kutenai Art Therapy Institute for the purpose of acquiring this asset, this building,
Yes.
would I still get my tax receipt?
Yes, and what we're looking at doing, we have an accountant on the board, which is wonderful. What we're looking at doing is actually taking the money in and saying, here's our goal. We want to raise 75% of the purchase price. If we don't, we'll return the money to you.
Sure, right. Okay.
So, we're going for the brass ring, the gold ring.
Right.
Yeah.
But just to be clear, I mean, any money donated to you would be tax deductible.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, well, that's
yeah.
that's great.
Completely.
The tax receipt would be delayed though.
Sure, until
we know
until
that,
you got, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
We've set the goal of 75% by the end of next year.
Yeah, okay, great.
Councillor Woodward.
Sorry, just a supplemental. If this doesn't work and you don't get your master's accreditation, can the school continue to function as it is? Or is there some sort of threat to the organization?
Really good question. You want to answer it? You want me to? I think, we've gone for 25 years. We've been able to, like, everybody's paid below market. We have wonderful teachers. We have a team of people who've stayed with us for years, the core teachers, but it's getting tougher and tougher. Inflation's hitting us hard. We're not able to, to pay people at the level we want to. It's like we need to change. We need to break through this, because just relying on tuition, we take 10% of the MCFD contract, for administration. There's not an income generator. So, we really want to go for it now. We have to, I think. I think it's going to get more and more difficult to survive. I mean, I think Katie will continue, but I don't know how long we can do it. And I mean, for myself, coming from a business background, it's like we've got to get a stronger base under ourselves here. We can't continue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of make or break.
It is a bit of a make or break in some ways. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. I work at Selkirk College, so I have a curiosity about the order of operations here when you're already a private training institution accredited, and you're looking for the EQA designation. You have that. And so now it's just, and sounds to me from the presentation that you have a diploma that almost is what the CATA would call a master's degree. Is that correct? Like you're close to, what you offer now is really close to being a master's degree?
Yes, so from CATA, so for the
Yes.
Canadian Art Therapy Association's, from their standards of practice.
Yes.
We meet all the competencies for a master's program.
Yes.
So where our hiccup was when we actually went to apply through the Ministry of Advanced Education when we went through their process. That's where the hiccup came in, and they said, you're not meeting the financial requirements.
Okay, I understand now.
And people who, Councillor, people who come into the program have to have a bachelor's degree, a baccalaureate or equivalent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I understood that. Yeah. Oh, Janice, thank you. Mayor Morrison has a question. She's a voice in the sky.
Maybe she's a voice.
Mayor Morrison, do you have a question for our presenters?
Yes, I do. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. My apologies for being the voice in the sky. I do have a question, and that is, I didn't hear you mention that you had made any attempt to potentially maybe have discussions with Kootenay School of the Arts or Selkirk College or the branch of UBC that we have in Nelson. And I'm just wondering, is because of the sensitive nature of your instruction and the work you're doing, you don't see being able to join with another college or educational institute that we have in our region?
Yeah, well, please help me. But so certainly we're interested in partnerships and collaboration, and have in different ways had conversations with everyone that you've mentioned there, Mayor. For us, a laddering agreement would be, something that we would certainly consider. But the players that you've mentioned there, that wouldn't be an option with any of them, as they don't offer, a master's in art therapy. But if we're thinking more as kind of, collaborating in acquiring an asset, or if we're thinking of collaborating in terms of, Katie potentially coming under the umbrella of one of the other established post-secondaries, One of our concerns with that would be, of course, just loss of autonomy. So, if it was UBC or something like that, then you're kind of swooped into their systems, and so we have some awareness of that. But I do think we very much have an openness in collaborating wherever it might be the right fit. The conversations that we've had so far just haven't led to anything fruitful.
Madam Mayor, we have had a number of conversations over the year with Selkirk College that have been very fruitful, and the previous president, he was incredibly helpful to us, and really supportive, and continues to be supportive to us. We are in some discussions with some other post-secondaries who are looking at coming to offering master's degrees that we may be able to have an agreement with. So we are looking at that possibility as an alternative now. Yeah.
Thank you for answering my question from the voice from above.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, then we'll receive the presentation, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
At this time, I would request a resolution to close the meeting to the public. It's the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and staff and any approved audiences be excluded from this meeting, and that the special closed meeting of council continue under section 91E of the community charter to deal with matters relating to the following land improvements. May I have a motion? Councillor Lochtenberg, second by Councillor Woodward. All those in favor, and passes. Thanks.
Okay, I asked ChatGPT for